so much for that introduction. Well, like Melissa just told you, I'm Miss Myra, and I'm going to introduce my bass player over here. This is Michael Carvalli on the stand-up bass. And I think I have to preface my own intro with the most commonly asked question. So after I play my last note on stage and I put my guitar away and I step off the stage, the most commonly asked question I get is, let's see if you can guess it. Any guesses from the audience? What do people ask me after I get off the stage? What small town? Bemidji. Surprisingly, no, that's not the most commonly asked question I get. The most commonly asked question I get is, how does a person so young get involved with music from the 1920s? How does that happen? Not the 2020s, the 1920s. So I grew up the child of older parents who, they listened to early rock and roll. They listened to Buddy Holly. They listened to Chuck Berry. And instead of rebelling forward and listening to pop music of our current era, I went back in time and decided I was going to be really involved and interested in music from the 20s because it just really spoke to me. And my first interaction actually playing this music started with piano lessons as a small child. And I remember my piano teacher really struggling to find a way to motivate me. And he's like, well, gee, I don't think you really want to learn Pachelbel's Canon, do you? And he brought me this song, The Saints Go Marching In, which you probably all know. And my 7-year-old mind was just blown. Like, wow, what's this? Syncopation and swing notes. So I went home that night and just learned it by heart and just fell in love with it and didn't look back. And I moved on to ragtime piano from there. And eventually started this dance called Lindy Hop, and just kind of really strengthened my connection with the music. And then I went down to New Orleans in 2013, as she said, fell in love with the music down there. Fell in love with being part of a second line parade for the first time. So I came back here and decided I wanted to share that music with other folks. So that culminated in the origins of my band, Miss Myra and the Moonshiners, of which we have a proud t-shirt owner in the audience. Just thought I would call you out. Yeah, and now I'm just going to pass the microphone to Michael briefly to talk about his experiences with the music, and then I promise you we'll get to playing some music. Yeah, sure.
This is fine. Hi, my name's Michael, and I'm originally from New Jersey. I moved to Minneapolis for music school, where I was exposed to jazz, modern jazz. It wasn't until after college I found that there was jazz before Miles Davis and John Coltrane and all those guys. So that's when I discovered 1920s jazz, and to keep it short, that's how I fell in love with it right from there, and I just kept playing it ever since. So just doing my best to preserve the style.
Yeah, now he's a proud bass player. All right, so that's Michael. And so we're going to start off the first portion of the playing parts of this concert with some of our original tunes. And the first two I'm going to play for you are called I Wish I Were Single Again, which is, I think, interesting because a lot of the tunes from like the era that I'm interested in sort of focus on romantic relationships with men and how that seems to be a focal point, but I thought it would be sort of more in line with my own experiences to talk about being a single woman. So here we go. This one's called I Wish I Were Single Again. Wish I was single again. I'll be floating like a dead rough in the wind. If I were only single, and my pocket sure would jingle, and I'd be strolling with a grin. If I were only single instead, yeah, follow all the dreams I had to leave unsaid. If I were only single, my eyes surely would twinkle, and I'd be eating pizza in bed. Pizza in bed in the morning. Pizza in bed, yeah. Waffles for dinner any time of day, and a tin roof over my head. If I only single once more. Yeah. Nothing to hold me back, no man to be crying for. Yeah. If I were only single, then I'd be sure to mingle with every sinner, saint, and traveling troubadour. Next is a tune called Cedar Annie. It's about the concept of never feeling like you, as a woman, have to owe anything. Let's say when you're walking down the street and you get catcalled, and sometimes your first response is thank you, but really you just want to say no thank you. So this is about that. 1, 2, 3, 4. She's born without a care. Fearlessly she strolls down a riverside. Gone dragging by, and you won't get that girl to sigh. Oh no, not Cedar Annie. Oh, Cedar Annie. Oh, why don't you give a man a chance? Oh, Cedar Annie, won't you please give me a chance? But she owes me that. Alright, this next song is about being in line with being a musician. I feel like I have a problem settling down, so I guess I just picked a career that would allow me to deal with that problem in a good way. So this one is called Wandering Woman. Got no money in my pocket. What did I'll never know? But who says this lonesome high canyon? Miles and miles I've run, never stopping at your door. I'm wondering, always wanting for more. I think I might be falling for you, baby. Never thought of leaving you behind. I'm saying, maybe, baby, you could ease my worried mind. Well, I've tried moving onwards, but it's your eyes I adore. I'm wondering, always wanting for more. Moving onwards, but it's your eyes I adore. I'm wondering, always wanting for more. I'm wondering, always wanting for more. Thank you. Alright, we're going to do a tune that's not an original. This one actually is from the middle of the Prohibition era. And this is called Everybody Loves My Baby. I'm as happy as a queen, feeling good at everything. I'm just like a bird in spring, I got to let it out. It's my sweetie, can't you guess? I'm wild about you, my face. Does he love you? My answer, that's just why I shout it. Everybody loves my baby, but the baby don't love nobody but me. Nobody but me. Everybody wants my baby, but the baby don't like nobody but me. Honey, that's plain to see. He's my loving papa, I'm his loving man. He knows just how to do his good, like no one man can. That's why everybody loves my baby, but the baby don't love nobody but me. Nobody but me. I know, how many of you have seen my full band, Miss Myra and the Moonshiners? Yeah? Okay, cool. I know with the full band there's sort of a different expectation because there's just more driving force with the horns and the drums and all that, and it's harder to create a New Orleans sound with just the two of us without the horns. So I often do sort of focus on music that may draw from Django or other sort of guitarists that were featured more prominently instead of the horns, because that's just, you know, hard to do with no horns right here. So yeah, often when we're playing as a duo, I'll play songs that are more dear to my heart, that are more originals and likewise, but they may be a little more sentimental and sweet. So I hope we can vibe with that a little bit. And in line with that, this is a new song that I've just written during the pandemic, and it's called Until We Part Again. Till we part again, the skies will be gray, but I'm okay, wishing you the same and longing for a chance to part once more. Will it feel the same, the old ways we shared, after all we've seen, longing for the moment when we know for sure will be great, but I'm okay, wishing you the same, longing for a chance to part once more. Oh, will it feel the same, the old ways were shared after all we've seen, longing for the moment when we know for sure that we will part once more. Now's not the time for greeting. In my Thank you. Myra just discovered a loop pedal during quarantine, but she doesn't know how to use it yet, so sometimes it goes off at inappropriate times. Not that looping is exactly conducive with this genre of music. But yeah, so I think we're going to do 2 more songs in this set, and then we'll have a short Q&A if you have any questions about like our personal interactions with the music, and then after that we'll take a short intermission. And in the second set we're going to touch on the history of jazz, which is no small feat, but I feel like it needs to be touched on a bit to just sort of explain the type of music that we're doing. And we'll play some more music for you. So alright, 2 more songs in this set.
Don't you sigh, don't you cry. Bells are ringing, the birds are singing, dust us too. As we're smiling on through, don't you sigh, don't you cry. Sing about you, bye, 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 bye.
Thank you. Bye Blues, again, from the middle of the Prohibition era, 1925 for that one, actually. And we're going to end this set on a tune called Take Me Dancing. This was written by a friend of mine who said, Myra, I think this would be perfect for your band to play. So credits to Diana Oman on this next tune, Take Me Dancing. 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
I've got your hand resting in my hand. Your stay eyes locked into my gaze. Your stay hips fingers square up tonight. Your parted lips braced into my face. I feel your breath linger down my neck. Your fingertips, the night strolls bold. That bound heart leaping from my sweating chest when you say it's time to go. Take me dancing, take me dancing, close the rolling round. Take me dancing, and I'll take you to the moon. lately when I hear the mix. Sister DJ, light a spin. We're coming back around again. Take me dancing, take me dancing. Rose the floating round. Take me dancing, and I'll take you to the moon. Darling, don't you tease me. Tell me what I can't take me dancing, watch the floor around. Take me dancing, and I'll take you to I'm gonna take you to gonna take you to the moon. All right, thank you so much. So that does conclude the playing portion of our first set, but I'm going to open it up to Q&A. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask us, maybe about our personal journey with the music, or just random questions that you didn't have the chance before? Yeah.
Unusual guitar sound. Is that a result of the F-hole design? Is it supposed to round hole? I mean, the guitar sound is unique.
I would say that does affect it, but my guitar sound I think is also shaped in the way that I actually pick in itself. Like I have this developed this tendency to sort of raise my wrist more, which can give you sort of more momentum when you're picking acoustically, even though I'm plugged in. Since I love acoustic music, I tend to sort of use that wrist technique, which may change the sound as well. So,
Guitar playing is just amazing.
thank you. Do we have any other questions? No. All right. Well, you sure are a talkative crowd. All right. So, welcome back to the second set. Thank you for sticking around. This is the part where I get to talk a little bit about the history of jazz, which is kind of a deep topic and quite comprehensive. So the most important thing I can say before I touch on this is that jazz and blues is a black art form. Don't be fooled by who you see on stage. We may be white, but its foundations were in the heart of African American culture in New Orleans. And so that I need to talk a bit about the context of New Orleans as well. And as you probably know, it was a French colony, and it was purchased in Louisiana Purchase in 1803 by the United States. And because of this, it had a very sort of different culture from the rest of the continental U.S. So you would hear on the streets, for instance, Creole, which is a mixture of languages, and you would hear French. And the attitude was very sort of liberal and open, and people really appreciated good wine and good food and music and dancing. And it's also important to note, have a couple statistics. Promise, we'll go through them quickly. But as of 1721, enslaved West Africans totaled 30% of the population of New Orleans. And by the end of the 1700s, people of varied African descent, both free people and slaves, made up more than half of the city's population. Many also had arrived from the Caribbean and brought with them West Indian cultural traditions. So it's just really important to know that. And so there were a couple driving components of the origins of jazz. And one is that many of these slaves at the time and freedmen of color would meet in Congo Square, and they would play music, they would dance, they would celebrate their West African heritage. They would sing, they would do call and response sort of spirituals that were the early formations of blues. And also at this time, there were some other driving forces such as ragtime piano, which I did touch on earlier, somehow became my inspiration as a 17-year-old. So there were ragtime pianists who were playing at this time, and in the 1890s, that sort of style of music was like wildly popular, and Scott Joplin was composing, and that was sort of all the rage in the 1890s. And there was also like European sort of marching brass influence. So there were all of these components that sort of came together and met in this really special place called New Orleans, and were the history of basically what we call New Orleans traditional jazz. And that sort of culminated in the first recordings that were made in the year 1917 by the original Dixieland Jazz Band. And so that sort of gives you a brief overview of the history of jazz. Again, a really, really deep topic. And I'd studied history in college, but I studied Central Asian history, so it's not really, you know. So those are my words on that. And now I kind of want to pass the microphone to Michael and just let him talk about some of the early innovators and creators in this early New Orleans jazz scene. So, microphone's getting a little bit feedbacky here, so I'm going to turn this down a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Take it out or what? Yeah. There you go.
I would say that if you're into this kind of music, or if you're new to it, I would start with someone like Louis Armstrong. The thing about jazz is when people always say, "Oh, what do you play?" and I say I play jazz, people usually assume that it's 20 minutes long, there's no melody, it's a lot of free music, really a lot of chords and confusion, and there is that kind of jazz out there. But before that, there was this jazz, more of a simpler kind of music with melodies and lyrics, mostly about love and having a good time. So I would say that if you want to get into this kind of music, I would say Louis Armstrong is a great, Louis Armstrong best of, because he's going to have songs that you've heard before. They're going to be 2-3 minutes long, nice and short. I would say the Preservation Hall Jazz Band, if you come across them, or if you're in New Orleans, there's a Preservation Hall that you can go every night of the week and hear this kind of music live. Usually pretty cheap, but I would definitely start there if you are into this kind of music.
Yeah.
So,
Can you tell us some of the characteristics that like define this type of music? Like
some of the characteristics that define this music is improv. So when you have something like a country band or a rock band, chances are they know the music, it's studied, they've written it, they've rehearsed it. The thing about jazz, we don't have any sheet music here, but the thing about jazz is, besides the melody and the words, I'd say 99.9% of it is made up on the spot. So anything that you hear us do, we're following some sort of roadmap, but we're following chords, but where we place those notes in those chords and how we play those notes and what notes are notes that we choose on the spot for the most part. And that's the difference. That's what makes jazz so amazing, is that even modern jazz, not that I know I just kind of made fun of it for being 20 minutes long and having no melody, but it's very hard to play that kind of music, which is why I play this music. It's a lot simpler. So, but yeah, I'm going to give this over to her. She's a better talker.
All right, thank you, Michael, for those words. In this context, I think it's extremely important to, again, mention how blues was like a, I don't know, I almost think of it as like a mother of jazz. And in that context, I also have to talk about who were some of the like super important early blues artists. Many of them were black females. So like when I'm thinking of blues singers, I think of Ma Rainey, I think of Bessie Smith, and they definitely shaped and influenced the sound and were super prominent musicians in the 1920s. And you also have to remember, okay, so this was very much a male-dominated scene, but there still were female instrumentalists, mostly piano players for the most part. Sweet Emma, Little Armstrong, who was actually married to Louis Armstrong and was sort of the one who convinced him, hey, you got some talent, I think you need to go somewhere with that. But she was like a super prolific, talented piano player in her own right. So, with that in mind, before we play a couple more tunes, do you guys have any questions for us?
I have a question.
Yeah.
In your research, or do you know anything about what happened in New Orleans during Prohibition? I can kind of guess that they might have just not closed their bars. Or, you know, any of that detail. I know you're in the hometown of Annapolis.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So in my study of Prohibition, I actually haven't looked at New Orleans specifically, which is kind of a point that maybe I need to do more research on. But I can probably assume that they were part of that same sort of illicit underground club culture where jazz was already, the birthplace of jazz was New Orleans. So I'm assuming that that just never stopped. Jazz has always been a part of the history and culture and blood of New Orleans. Thank you for that question. That was really pointed. Does anybody else have any questions?
What's my favorite?
My favorite dish. Ooh. Oh my goodness. I just love jambalaya. Yeah, I love seafood. I love cheap fried chicken. That's really good too. Does anybody else have any other questions? There's really a lot to cover with the history of jazz, but I just want to keep it brief because we don't have a lot of time. So with that said, I'm going to play a couple more songs, and yeah, he's going to play along with me. And then we'll talk a little bit about jazz during the Prohibition era, which there are some fun and interesting stories that sort of fall in line with that, including a kidnapping, which I'm telling you about now, just to kind of keep you on your toes and make sure you don't go anywhere. All right, so this one is called Mon Homme, and it was written in the year 1918 in French. It means my man. Translated to English in 1920 and became a super pop hit in the States. And in line earlier with what I was saying about how a lot of the songs written from a female perspective were about relationships, and even if they weren't good ones, this one sort of falls in line with that, and I perform it because it feels pretty authentic to me. So this one's called Mon Homme.
Cette terre, ma joie, mon bonheur, c'est mon amour. J'ai donné tout ce que j'ai, mon amour et tout mon cœur, et mon amour. Belle la nuit de 4 jours, il veut séduire tout mon amour. Ce n'est pas qu'il soit beau, qu'il soit riche et costaud, mais je l'aime, yo t'aime fou des coups. Prends mes souhaits, je suis heureux, mais malgré tout, et je l'ai tellement dans le bureau, j'en viens m'attirer dès que c'est pour s'avenir. Je suis allée quand c'est ma souris à se pose, ça me prend toujours. Je l'ai tellement dans le bureau, couvre-moi de moi, et me faites faire n'importe quoi, je dirai ma foi, je sens que ma goût est enfant, mais je suis que femme. cost me a life, but that's one thing I've got. It's in my mind, quoting which I do bad, but all that I'll soon forget with my man. He's not the child looks at, no, you out of books, but he has my mind. 2 or 3 girls I see that he likes as well as me, but I love that man and I don't know why I should. That boy, he isn't any good. He isn't true. Oh boy, he lies to me too. What can I do? Oh, that man, I love him so, but he'll never know. All my life is just a spell, but honey, I don't care. When he takes me in his arms, the world is bright, alright. What's the difference if I say I'll go away when I know I'll come back to that man someday? For whatever that man is, know that I am his forever. Not that man. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I'm diagnosing why my guitar is currently not connected. But that's okay, because as I was talking about earlier, this music was meant to be played acoustically, and the first acoustic guitar innovators did not have electricity to plug into. So I'll just try to make this heard the best I can. If I can't get it figured out here, just give me a second. All right, there we go. Easy fix. This next one was written in 1926 by a famous composing duo called Jack Palmer and Spencer Williams, and it's called I Found a New Baby.
I found a new baby, sweet honey boy. My first black baby has filled me with joy. His new kind of loving drives me insane. Sweet little baby, honey, time that I get. One kiss, sweetest kiss, full of bliss, give me to someone. Nothing that honey eyes just mine. I've been happy 'cause I know me, baby. I just had you for you. I found a new baby, a new baby, that's all. Tell me about it. I found a new baby, sweet honey boy. My first black baby has filled me with joy. His new kind of love drives me insane. Sweet little baby, honey, don't that I crave. One kiss, sweetest kiss, full of bliss, give me to someone. Tells me all my guys is much I thought and happy 'cause I don't need baby. I just had you for you. I found a new baby, that's all.
All right. So I'd like to touch again briefly on one of my favorite guitarists. His name is Eddie Lang, And he was an Italian immigrant whose original name was Salvatore Massoro, and he decided he would change his name to sort of fit more into what was considered American culture at the time. But he had this beautiful, lovely guitar playing that was super innovative and was, again, one of the first guitarists who expanded on playing single notes and sort of brought the guitar into this beautiful place. So I'm going to do a song that sort of demonstrates his style up next, and this one is called I've Got Everything But You, and he recorded this song in the year 1927 with a singer named Alma Rotter, and all right, here we go.
2, 1, 2,
Got a dog and got a cat. I've got a collar and I've got a flag. Just got everything but you. Got a rug that's oh so rare. I've got a great big Morris chair. Just got everything but you. What good is a mom's chair? One it was made for two. What's the use of having a watch when all my days are blue? Devotee, the card and the flags. Leave the dog and forget the cat. I don't want anything but got two arms and then two holes. You got a song. Just got everything but you. Got two arms and then two holes. I've got two lips and they're made for this. I've got everything but you. What good is our paradise without someone to hold? What's the use of having lips when the ones you bring back home? Smash the ukulele, can the song. Without your loving, you know it's out the tongue. I don't want anything, I don't want anything but you.
So, some of the things that Eddie Lang did, even around chords, he would just embellish them, like. So he would just make it sort of really beautiful and embellish with these arpeggios that seem to be almost part of like the Italian tradition that he drew from. Italians were very, honestly, pretty cool mandolin players. Like, they were known for playing stringed instruments. So his take on jazz was with that sort of like cultural tradition through that, basically. So that's a little bit about Eddie Lang. And so now we get to the fun part where we talk a bit about Prohibition. And we talk about jazz during the age of Prohibition. And I have some notes on this, so I'm just going to flip to that, and you're just going to pretend there's really cool music playing in the background while I do that. And there's not like an awkward paper flipping noise happening by any means. Wow, this is why I hired him, isn't it? No, I hire him to look pretty. He sort of... All right, so January 16th, 1920, does that mean anything to you? I mean, we're only in the town that Andrew Volstead was from, right? So that was when the National Prohibition Act of 1919 sort of came into effect, and that was sponsored by your local representative, Andrew Volstead. So have any of you ever heard of the law of unintended consequences? So this was a new federal liquor law, and I really do think that it created this sort of illicit counterculture that actually promoted jazz, and really almost like in a way just sort of sponsored jazz artists. So at this point in time, saloons across the country were shuttering their front doors, but they kept the back doors open. And let's just say they wanted musicians to make this party. And they sponsored the likes of Louis Armstrong, King Oliver, Big Spiderbeck, Fats Waller. Countless more of these musicians were making money, and their art was being promoted as part of this underground culture. They were making money, and I'd say maybe they made hundreds of dollars, but there were some organized crime bosses who made quite a bit more than that. Yeah, so I think that in terms of like how Prohibition sort of intersected and interacted with jazz, is it, like I said, it did sort of really promote this culture and the music with it, and sort of led to this almost like illicit, exciting sort of feeling surrounding jazz. And I think that that sort of, to human nature, is just irresistible. Am I right? Like, it really is. So, and also, we do have to mention that at this point in time, again, African Americans were the primary drivers of this type of music. There were some white musicians who played along with them. And the most remarkable thing that I can say about this is that this was one of the first sort of instances where desegregation was sort of almost de facto. Like, bands would play mixed white and black. Musicians would record mixed white and black and had no issue with that, even though at that point in time, black musicians, their music was released under what was titled race records. And white musicians just got to be popular music at the time, you know. But there were even instances where they recorded together and they worked together and had beautiful collaborations, but the record companies that released their music sort of almost refused to acknowledge this publicly. So in the case of, again, touching on one of my favorite guitarists, Eddie Lang, he actually recorded a series of duets called Blue Guitars in the year 1928 with this prominent black artist named Lonnie Johnson. And again, two wonderful guitar players getting together in a room, just spinning off of each other. It's a beautiful thing. But OK Records, who actually released this, decided that Eddie Lang, he had to change his name to a name that sounded more black. Blind Willie Dunn, actually, so that they could release it and sort of not imply that this was a mixed race record. So we have this point in time where this illicit sort of underground culture is, it's almost, it goes hand in hand with jazz music, and it goes hand in hand with playing for mixed audiences, playing for rooms where farmers and mob bosses rubbed shoulders, and rich and poor, and black and white, musician and non-musician, and dancers all sort of existed and were in the same space. So I think that's a really beautiful thing. Yeah, and with that in mind, we're going to do a couple songs from this era, which we already sort of have been doing. But yeah, let's do a song actually just preceding that, barely. This one is called After You've Gone. From the year 1918, I've got to say. This was a pop hit at the time.
Now won't you listen dear, while I say, how could you tell me that you're going away? Don't say that we must part. Don't you break my aching heart. No, I've loved you now so many years. Loved you night and day. Can't you see me? Can't you read my tears? Listen while I say, after you've gone and left me crying, after you've got me being on a night, you feel blue, you're gonna feel sad, you will miss the dearest pal that you ever had. All through these years we've been together, through joy and tears and all kinds of ways. Someday when you're alone, your heart will break like mine. You want me only after you've gone, after you've gone away. Get it, Michael. Woo!
Thank you. All right. So that puts us at the year 1918, pop hit of the year, After You've Gone. And now we're just ready to get into the Prohibition era, move straight into the 20s. Yeah, so let me just turn this over. See what I had in mind for you when I decided I was going to put this set list together. All right, this one is called Some of These Days.
You're
Okay. We're going to touch on a little bit of blues because we can't forget that blues is in many ways a predecessor to the type of music that we do. But at the same time, it had its own vibrant scene that was growing throughout the 20s. For instance, Bessie Smith was actually the highest paid black performer during this time period, like so much so to the point where like she decided, I'm not going to ride in a segregated train car, I'm just going to buy my own train car. So this is like how important this genre of music was and how it was sort of developing and very strong at this point in time. So we're going to take a moment to do a little bit of a blues song here, and this one is called 1 Hour Mama.
I've always heard that peace makes waste, so I believe I'm taking my time. Highest mountains can't be right, yes, that's something you must climb. I was needn't ever have to take the lead. I'm working wherever range plan, and maybe there's no need for speed. I'm running, so the one in a kind of hopper. Ain't the kind of rain for me, oh. Set your alarm clock, mama, for an hour, and that's a proper. Give me all the loving that I need. Honey, I don't want no lame excuses about my loving feeling so good. You couldn't wait on long, baby. I hope I'm understood. I'm one, so the one that I kind of papa, yeah. Ain't the kind of man for me. So no one in a kind of papa ain't the kind of man for me. Oh no, 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 no. Set your alarm clock, papa, for 1 hour, and that's proper. Give me all the loving that I need. Honey, I don't want no lame excuses about my loving feeling so good. You couldn't wait no longer, baby. I hope it's understood. I'm a runner, I'm a woman, so I'm in a kind of vibe. Hey, they got a line for me, oh no, no, honey. Hey, they got a line for me, oh no, no, sugar. Hey, they got a line for me. Oh no, no, no. Michael Carvalho on the bass. That song is near and dear to my heart because when I talked to you earlier about those sort of songs being from the female perspective, sort of based on, like pleasing the men in your life and the romantic relationships in your life, that one is about the women being pleased. So I really appreciate the blues song specifically that I've been able to find in that context. They're jingle juice. Oh, what's it really? I can't find my friend. Diabetes and my demise, but I don't hate to see that in the sunlight you shot up and see what I can do with this time. I'm slowly losing hours, I'm all locked up inside. Tick-tock goes the diabetes and bad in my eyes, but I don't hate to see that in this single time you shot a bruise. See what I can do in this town. You can prove it, boy, you can drink it. You got me asking silly questions, and I keep feeling it. You can prove it, boy, you can drink it. You got me asking silly questions, and I keep feeling it. You can prove it, boy, you can drink it. You got me asking silly questions, and I keep feeling it. You can prove it, boy, you can drink it. You got me asking silly questions, and I keep feeling it. Well, it's macchiato, white collar, New York, Miss $4, call me as espresso, because you left it out there. You didn't die. Oh, beats were crying. Gotta have more that, give me some more. There's no denying. Oh, beats were crying. Gotta have more that, give me some more. There's no denying. Oh, beats were crying. Gotta have more that, give me some more. Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for being here. Thank you to Melissa. Thank you to everybody at Bluenose Gopher. Thank you to the Minnesota Southwest Council for the Arts. I think I got it right that time. So we have this opportunity, the very last couple minutes of our set. You can either ask us a couple questions, hopefully you will want to, or we could play another song, and you get to decide that. How did I guess that's what you were going to ask? Turns out people pay me to play guitar and sing and not talk. All right, Michael, what should we do for our last song? It's not going to be on there.
Ask them if they want slow or fast.
Do you want slow or fast?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I hear ya. Ever say good now? knows how to fly. Positively, absolutely sure was blind. I found the best man that ever was. He's just some of those old things that he does. Shakes my ashes and he greases my griddle. Charms my butterapple, he strokes my fiddle. Lord, that man, he is such a kind of way. Threads my needle and he creams my wheel. Heats my heat of that boy, he chops my meat. Oh, you know that man, he's such a kind of way. He never, ever has a single thing to say while he's out working so hard. Oh, how I wish that you could just see the way that handles my front yard. I said, don't ever get a chance to melt away. That boy he sees, I get a fresh piece every single day. Look, that man, he is such a kind of way. All right, what kind of man are you? That's Michael Carvalho. Such a hand out of way. Oh no, when he never ever has a single thing to say. Oh, while he's out working so hard. Oh, how I wish that you could just see the way that he handles my front yard. Oh, I see, don't ever get a chance to melt away. That boy he sees, I get a fresh piece every single day. Well, that man, he is such a handicap. Oh, man. Oh, I love that man. Thank you so much. We are the Miss Myra duo of Miss Myra and the Moonshiners. I hope this was a fun and enlightening presentation. And again, thank you to the Bluenose Gopher. A round of applause for the Bluenose Gopher Public House. A round of applause for Melissa over here. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. And do remember that this is a continuing series that goes through November, I believe.